we continue on in our sermon series, Heroes of the Bible, by looking at one of the two women whose story has been immortalized in the Bible in a book that is named after her. There's Ruth, and then our subject today, Esther. A woman who, to paraphrase her story, stepped up when her people needed it the most, realizing that she was placed where she was for such a time as this. Now, I'm sure in hearing that brief description, each of us as faithful Christians would say that we would do the same thing if placed in her position. We would step up, risk it all for the health and welfare of our people. But there's a social psychological phenomenon that I think at times comes into play for us, even as Christians. And this phenomenon is known as the bystander effect. And it occurs when the presence of others discourages an individual from intervening in an emergency situation, against a bully or during an assault or other crime. And it's believed the greater number of people or bystanders, the less likely it is that any one of those people is going to provide help to a person in distress. The more people around, the less likely it is that someone will step up. Now, for some people, they may justify this by saying, well, I'm going to take my phone out to record it. That way there's evidence of what happened, or in case someone does step up, that they can be then hailed as a hero. Or others will say, that person looks like they're going to do something, so I'll just wait. Or that group of people is closer. Or perhaps I have a job interview or someplace to be, and I don't want to get myself all disheveled. Or perhaps that person over there looks bigger and stronger, better equipped to intervene and resolve the situation. But ultimately, it's hoping that someone else will be the one to step up or step in. And it's a phenomenon that's not just limited to the examples given in the definition, though, because at times as Christians, we find ourselves in the same position. Moments where someone is in need, or something is needed. A need is needing to be met, and we pray, please God, intervene in this situation. Send someone who can help this family. Give them the assistance that they need. Send someone who can share with this terrible person the good news so their life can be changed. We look around and we see many other people in the pews around us, people perhaps we believed are better equipped or more knowledgeable. Perhaps it's someone closer to their age, is the same gender that they are, people who know them a little better or make a little bit more than we do. We get caught up in the Christian bystander effect, thinking and praying that someone else will take care of it, when at times God is looking down at us and thinking, don't look at them. I placed you here for such a time as this. That while anyone else could share the good news with them, provide assistance that they need, could offer to meet that specific need that they have, could lay their personal life, their spiritual life, their physical life on the line, that he is calling you and I at times to be the ones to do it for them in service of him. And this, friends, is the situation that Mordecai and Esther found themselves in during their story recorded in the book that we've been reading from. And one that she would ultimately stand up to resolve, no matter the cost, in service to her God and in support of her people. Stepping up in the moment when they needed her the most to ensure that they would continue. And this was done in the face of a scheme that aimed to wipe them out as a people. And in doing so, she lays out for us the way that we can make sure that we step up to meet the moment in our opportunities. And so as we open our story in chapter 4, we need to realize that we're partway through her tale. To this point, we've been introduced to Esther, who was originally known as Hadassah, a young Jewish woman who had been orphaned as a child and then raised by her uncle Mordecai. She grows up to become the queen of Persia, having won over King Ahasuerus with her beauty, her grace, her humility, and honor. Chapter 2 tells us that the king loved her more than all the other women in the kingdom he was considering to be his wife, that she found great favor with him. but he is unaware of her true ethnicity. This feeling of favor grows when, through Mordecai, she shares with the king a plot by two of his officials to have him killed, giving Mordecai the credit in the end. And this is the situation that leads Haman, one of the king's highest officials, to convince him into signing an order aimed at destroying the Jewish people. And this act signed by the king, who was unaware that his wife was a member of this nation. Hearing about this, our passage tells us that Mordecai and all the people take to the traditional action of fasting and praying and wailing and calling out in order to seek the intervention and deliverance of God. At the same time, though, Mordecai knows that there is someone who can help their people, something he can do, and so he calls for his niece Esther. Our passage tells us they communicate through an intermediary, him sharing the situation, her responding with her concerns, him trying again to convince her to move forward, and her ultimately stepping up to help her people. And in the midst of these interactions, we can learn the way for us to address situations of spiritual action in our own lives. Because upon hearing the news from Mordecai about what Haman has done, Esther's first thought is to calculate the cost of what it would mean for her to step up. She knew what Mordecai was asking could mean the end of life as she knew it, and potentially the end of her earthly life completely. This was because in admitting to the king who she was and the nation she belonged to, she was risking an unfavorable response. On top of that, she knew that even as the queen, with all of the power and the position that she held, the law said that if she approached the king without him calling for her, that she could be put to death if he didn't raise the golden scepter to her. Esther knew as they began these conversations that her life was at risk in calculating the cost. But knowing that that cost was only part of the process, because next we read that she had to assess the situation in order to set her priorities, to determine what was of the highest importance: personal protection or the salvation of her people. There must have been the thought for her that if she just remained quiet, there would be so much good that she could do in the long run, other opportunities to step up for her people, that there would be other ways for her to contribute to life there. Perhaps that God would provide another way for them to be saved. That he'd done it before, he certainly could do it again. But into that line of thinking, we have this amazing quote from Mordecai. And in response, he says, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Mordecai reminding her that God can, has, and will find a way, but that she was the way that he was requiring in that moment. And so in assessing this situation, we see that Esther comes to the realization that her safety is less of a priority than that of her people. And so she decides to step up and say something to the king, to risk it all. A choice she makes, but one that she requires something from Mordecai and their people in support of the effort she's about to make. That she will need to prepare herself, thirdly, before going to the king. And so she asks him and their people to join her in fasting and praying for 3 days, stating that at the end of that time she will go, and if I perish, I perish. Esther seeking the support and the prayers of her people in order to gain the strength from God to carry out his plans, to receive the wisdom, the boldness, the courage of God to move forward with a plan she knows could very well be the end of her life. It's fitting that she chooses 3 days of prayer and fasting, a number that in the Bible symbolizes completion, wholeness, perfection. Esther was taking the perfect amount of time to prepare herself for what was to come. And then taking the last step of the process for overcoming the spiritual bystander effect, stepping up for God and for others, she boldly acted. She didn't waste time. She didn't drag it out. She didn't keep praying, hoping that someone else would step up. She didn't let doubt or indecision set in. Esther used that time to prepare herself and then move forward with the plan. She asks the king for a banquet and invites Haman to attend. They attend, and at the end of it, she asks them to come back for another one. During the night, Haman sets up a plan to get rid of Mordecai as we continue on in Esther chapters 5, 6, and 7. But God has other plans. And the king is restless one night, seeking to honor someone, and he realizes that nothing was done for Mordecai who had saved his life. He calls on Haman to go out to honor him with a robe and one of the king's horses, causing Haman to further plot to remove Mordecai. But he is the only one ultimately taken out by the request of the queen. When she asks the king to spare her people, God using Esther in these moments to carry out his plans for salvation. Her actions removing the old order and allowing them to meet, to worship, and to protect themselves. God's plan for his people carried out because Esther was willing to no longer be a bystander, but to stand up in the situation in front of her. Calculating the cost, setting her priorities to God's, preparing her heart and her mind and her spirit, and then acting boldly in service to God. A plan and a process, friends, that we can emulate in our own lives as we seek to stand up, step in, and to assist those in needs around us. A process that can keep us from falling into the trap of being a bystander to the concerns of those around us, to the challenges of our brothers and sisters, to the struggles of people in our lives, our family, our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers, strangers that we'll meet on the streets and in other places. That we need to calculate the cost of acting, but also the cost of not acting. To understand the risk that we're taking with our time, our talents, and our treasures, yes, but with our lives, with our relationships, with our standing in the community or in the eyes of people around us. We need to set our priorities right to align them with the priorities of God. To put him first, others second, and ourselves last as we assess what we should do. To prioritize the blessings of others above our own, to freely give what has been freely received if needed. To set those priorities through the preparations of our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. We need to seek the support of other people if there's time to reach out for prayers. But most importantly, to seek the direction and support of God in every situation. To stop and to pray. To ask him to show us his way. To not just ask God, send someone, but to ask, Father, have you sent me for such a time as this? And then to act boldly in meeting that need if God has called us to it. To live out the words of the hymn we sing often in our services, here am I, my Lord, send me. Here am I, my Lord, send me. I surrender all to obey thy call. Here am I, my Lord, send me. Trusting that God's plans are greater than ours, that he's working when we can't see it, that there's a purpose even when we don't understand it, that it's not for us to know what will come from our efforts, but to trust that God will use them for his glory. To stand up for those who are not able to stand up for themselves. To use our power, our position, or our privilege, as small as we might think it is, to be a voice for those whose voices are not heard. To sacrifice what we have, what we feel we've earned, what we have in excess, to allow others to have what they need. We need to be willing to risk the relationships with the person who says they don't want to hear about our religion. The opportunity we have because they tell us we can't share our faith. The place we live in or are comfortable with because he's calling us to take up our cross, our lives, and follow him to a new city or province or country, a line of work or way of life. To answer the call and step boldly forward into the uncertainty, saying, if I perish, I perish, and being willing to live it out if necessary. Friends, that's what we read in the story of Esther that set her apart, but ultimately set her people free. A willingness to risk it all for the greater good of all people. A selfless act of sacrifice that could have led to her end, but was a beginning for her people. An example to us in the life of our hero of the Bible this week that God doesn't want us to be bystanders praying from the sidelines. He isn't looking for fans who just come and sit in the pews cheering for him and other people every week. He requires from us what Esther lived out, what he modeled in the life of Jesus: faithful obedience and holistic trust in his plans for our lives. That we would step off the sidewalk and get out into the streets. That we would get out of our seats and follow him to wherever it is that he's leading us. That we would stop being bystanders and start being world changers. Because, brothers and sisters, he has placed us here for such a time as this.